All right, welcome everyone to Why Your GTM Strategy Looks Great on Paper and Falls Apart in Reality. My name is Jim Bell. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at LeanData. I'm super excited to be hosting our session today. Today we're going to be talking about a challenge that many go-to-market leaders, I think, quietly suspect is an issue, is that their go-to-market strategy is not actually the problem. In fact, most teams have been clear on their market, on their ICP, on their positioning, more so than they've ever been. But strategy alone doesn't drive growth. Execution does. And so what we're seeing is a widening execution gap, and that's what we want to talk about today. And it's based on some research that we have done in conjunction with Harvard Business Review Analytics Services. So our agenda, first, we'll go through some housekeeping and then introduce our panel today. And then we'll talk about the research findings, and then we'll spend the bulk of our time on that discussion around the key findings from the research about go-to-market execution. All right, so what I'd like to do next is introduce our panel. I'm really excited about the group that we've got for you here today. So let's bring them up. So first from Adobe, we have Bob Yang. Bob currently leads the global go-to-market for Adobe's AI platform and products that are transforming customer experience orchestration. Prior to that role, Bob led the sales strategy and operations at Adobe, as well as enablement. And he's been supporting Adobe's global enterprise sales organization for a number of years. Jen Allen-Knuth is here with us as well. She is the founder of DemandJen, where she trains sales teams to compete against buyer status quo and changing their behavior. Jen spent 18 years as a frontline seller at CEB and was very involved with the Challenger sale before becoming a chief evangelist for the Challenger framework and the head of head of community growth for Lavender AI after that. Currently, she trains teams at companies like GE, IBM, Square, Walmart Marketplace, and Bloomberg. And she spends her free time rescuing dogs and being a stepmom to 4 kids. And finally, we have Ryan Schwartz. Ryan is joining us from Samsara, where he is the VP of Marketing Systems and Intelligence. Ryan is recognized as a thought leader in agentic and technical marketing, having managed advanced marketing and sales technology stacks for nearly 20 years. Ryan has a deep background in managing technical marketing and demand teams for enterprise organizations. Prior to Samsara, Ryan has held leadership roles at Lacework, Navan, which is formerly TripActions, MongoDB, DocuSign, and has been a part of 5 successful exits since 2011 as an operator and advisor, 2 of which were IPOs. So super excited to have this group on board. I'm going to just leave it at the intros for now, and I'm going to come back and you guys are going to carry the load on the conversation after I go through a little bit of the research. So thank you for bearing with me. So let's go to the report that's now available, and we're happy to send you that at the end of this. So this was a Harvard Business Review Analytics Services report. Everyone on our panel participated in this and were interviewed as subject matter experts. But beyond that, there were over 500 people who were surveyed, all B2B professionals in sales and marketing. You can kind of see the breakdown here of the types and sizes of organizations and the types of roles that they held. I'm not going to dwell on that part because I do want to move us towards the conversation. But the big result coming out of the findings was this idea of a significant execution gap when it comes to go-to-market strategy and delivering on results. So as part of the survey, we asked people how important is go-to-market strategy in their organization, and 83% said it was very important. That was the highest rating on the scale. But only 38% said that their strategy was very effective. So there's clearly this big gap between importance and effectiveness when it comes to executing your go-to-market strategy. And of those who are seeing those gains and seeing that improvement, definitely cited increased revenue as the largest benefit that they saw. There were many others behind that. So let's dig down a little bit more into the data. As a part of the survey, the group of people were sort of asked how effective they were. And then they were classified based on the score in that question into the leader group, which were the ones who scored themselves the highest in their go-to-market execution, There were those that were sort of categorized as the followers, the ones who were sort of in the mid-range in that question, given their rating, and then the laggards, which was the group that were sort of the least effective by their own measurement of their effectiveness on go-to-market. So if we looked at and compare the leader group and the laggard group in particular, 4 key themes really came out of what's the difference between those who were leading and those who were really falling behind or were the laggard group. The first was the leaders really prioritized cross-team collaboration. So 81% of them prioritized that collaboration versus 48% in the laggards group. The second was that they really used the buyer journey as the organizing principle around their go-to-market strategy. And so 53% of the leader group felt like they understood their buyer journey well. Whereas when you get down into the followers, it was 18%. When you got to the laggards, it was only 11%. So you can see a clear correlation between the buyer journey and go-to-market effectiveness. The third was around aligning teams around shared metrics and goals. 63% of the leaders reported strong team alignment. In that bottom group of the laggards, it was just 11%. And finally, not surprisingly, investing in technology and AI to scale execution was another key area of differentiation. Although the gap wasn't as large here, 71% of the leaders saw AI as important for go-to-market, whereas only 50% of the laggards did in that case. So we're going to use this kind of framework, and not entirely in this order, to sort of talk about sort of these key insights from the report about why there is this gap in execution between the leaders and the laggards. So I'm going to sort of skim through some of the data in here on each of those 4, and then I'm going to sort of open up these 4 topics into for our panel to talk about. So first, on prioritizing cross-team collaboration and coordination, 78% of the folks who were surveyed felt that their organization needs better coordination across GTM systems. The ones who were in the leader group were defining common metrics to help align teams on shared strategy, and they were using things like cross-team reviews of deal outcomes as a way of helping create better alignment and understanding of where things were. On the second topic, aligning teams around shared metrics and goals, the leaders were definitely much more likely to be aligning on those goals specifically and sharing them across teams. They saw that shared metrics provided an execution infrastructure. So people were looking at the same data. It helped create the linkages and the handoffs between teams. And the benefits of that collaboration included things like improved marketing ROI, better buyer targeting, and faster reactions to buyer signals. The third was leveraging the buyer journey as that organizing principle. So 92% of the survey respondents agreed that GTM strategy should very much align with the buyer journey. But the buyer journey has changed dramatically, and that was clear from the data as well. That idea of a linear sales funnel, a linear buying process, just no longer reflects how buyers discover and explore solutions today. Secondly, that a buyer journey, better buyer journey understanding directly correlated with revenue growth outcomes we saw from the survey. And the leaders treated this idea of process around the buyer journey and aligning their teams as a continuous discipline, not a one-time initiative to help them move forward. And finally, on the technologies and AI side, certainly, 68% agreed that AI is important for their organization's B2B go-to-market strategy. By the way, this survey was completed towards the end of last year. I expect this number would be even higher today. But we did get some interesting data on some of the top AI use cases around insights, optimizing campaigns, coaching sales reps, personalizing content on the marketing side, as well as insights around lead matching and routing being key tools, again, having to do with handoffs and getting the right data to create the right actions by the go-to-market teams. And finally, AI being used for mass personalization to help do the work that was often done by humans. So I skimmed through this stuff quickly. There's a bunch of data in here. You'll get the slides. I've always been a big fan of stealing data from slides like this to use to help push forward my different initiatives, but I really want to move to talking to our panel today. All right. So let's start with that first key finding that we had, which is really around starting with the right foundation, which is sort of the people and the alignment and prioritizing cross-team collaboration. And maybe, Ryan, I'll start with you. The report finds that only 32% of organizations say their sales and marketing teams are very aligned. And that's before you kind of factor in the pace of change that AI is introducing. At Samsara, I've gotten a chance to see a little bit of your work, and it's really impressive. You're operating at the intersection of some pretty significant forces: agentic AI, compounding innovation cycle, the need to move faster than ever. Kind of how is that changing how you think about cross-team collaboration?
Yeah. Well, thank you, and hey everyone. Yeah, I would probably argue that there's never been a time in our careers where cross-team collaboration is more important. If there's not like a close organizational value at the speed in which we're moving, the speed in which we're innovating, if you don't have that, like we won't be able to get the most impact to our buyers and to our customers. And there's some complexities that are happening right now. If you look at with agentic compounding, is you're looking at being able to do more at once and moving at a faster pace. And also in the state of perpetual learning, like the rate of innovation is incredibly fast right now. And all of us are adapting to this new pace and like this new mental load of perpetual learning. The result of this is that teams are moving a lot faster. And so if you're not staying well aligned, all of a sudden you could very quickly become disjointed and working in different directions. So there are a few things that we've started to do to try to solve this, but I will admit we are constantly learning on how to improve this. I think all of us are. But there's a few things. One is we're starting to do much closer aligned road mapping, and we're solving problems together. So we will, as a go-to-market team, define what are the key projects and solutions that we need to go and solve, and then create a cross-functional group, a pod of people who are working on solving that problem. So we're much more oriented and kind of going across, removing these barriers, removing silos, and really functioning more as a tight unit. And as a result of that, you're seeing decentralization start to happen. You're starting to see, where these silos used to exist, AI and the rate in which we're moving, we can actually decentralize some of this. An example of that might be that let's say you used to maybe have a team that did all analysis was done through this one team. Well, now you can make all of these data pipelines available through an MCP, and then you can have a data connector with a skill set, be able to start to do these insights for you. Now you're delivering, making everyone able to do analysis. So as a result of that, you can start to decentralize some of these core responsibilities. And so that's kind of what we've started to do, is we basically started to become much more oriented on specific strategic goals, creating cross-functional teams that are responsible for driving those outcomes, and kind of decentralizing some of the roles that that used to be kind of siloed before.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So much of the way we've operated over the years in the past is in a very sort of functional, siloed way. So I think a more goal-oriented setup makes a lot of sense, doing that cross-functionally. I know sort of one of the changes we've seen is certainly sort of the move to buying groups. I know, Bob, that was something you kind of were quoted and mentioned in the report. And sort of creating this natural requirement, I guess, for synergy between sales and marketing. So curious how, how you've sort of been driving transformation in that collaboration between marketing and sales, and maybe particularly what you're doing around buying groups.
Sure, Jim. And look, I mean, our breakthrough was that we shifted from the traditional model where marketing created top of funnel and then sales drove progression and close, the sort of the linear demand gen that you said earlier. And we realigned the roles and responsibilities. We purposefully made it more collaborative so that even within pipeline progression, for example, where traditionally it was purely a sales responsibility, we realigned it so the marketing and sales drove that hand in hand. And so combination of buying groups as well as additional data and context within each opportunity, by enriching that, we're able to use that to identify gaps in coverage. For example, if you had an engagement from a particular persona buying group that was lacking, it was both sales and marketing's responsibility to try to get that person to a key dinner or an event or identify coverage. And that teamwork and shared ownership really transformed what was, oftentimes a sort of us and them mentality to a how do we work together mentality. And through that, the governance and the data that comes up around gaps, pipeline, engagement, whether that's AI surfaced or human surfaced, we had a shared existing review process, whether it was the marketing DemandJen review or a progression review, as well as an individual sales deals review. We all looked at the same data and understood how that data came about and what it meant, and the different avenues across both teams that we had to address any issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And to do that kind of at the scale that you're dealing with at Adobe, that is no small task, I imagine. Okay, Jen, you kind of mentioned in the report about sort of, I guess, a warning about, without strong coordination across GTM teams and sort of a more education-first approach, you do really risk sort of confusion, et cetera, across different channels while you're trying to, communicate with customers. So you do work with a lot of different B2B organizations. I'm curious on kind of if you could elaborate more on that importance of collaboration and channels of communication.
Sure. First, I have to give Bob 2 snaps. If Adobe can do it at their scale, the rest of us can do it. That is music to my ears to hear that has been formalized. So first, let me define education first. It's not a new thing, right? So this is an example of an education first channel, right? I imagine LeanData is looking to engage with customers here who might go on to become customers of their product. But one of the biggest breakdowns, and this is something I lived and I see a lot of organizations fall into this trap, is the desire to make any individual thing we do in marketing turn into a commercial outcome immediately. And so what I mean by that, when I was at Challenger, I did a series around winning the Challenger sale. And the whole concept there was like, we can earn mind share by being innately helpful to our prospects before we ask something of them. So I would do a video and it would be, sorry, I knew that was going to happen. This is what you get when you have 4 dogs in the house. I would do a video series and it would be about how a Challenger would run discovery. I wasn't pitching the Challenger sales solution. I was rather just saying, here's what good looks like. Here's how I got to it. Here's what I got stuck with. The problem becomes when you take a learning focused campaign, asset, engagement like that, and then toss it over to sales. And then sales sends the follow-up email of, would you like to see a demo of Challenger, right? So I imagine for many of us, if we sit through a webinar like this, which is inherently based on thought leadership, and then you get a demo on the other side saying, now do you want a demo of LeanData? It's going to create friction in the experience. And so that, I think, is what, when I see a lot of sales and marketing teams that end up kind of working against one another and both ultimately working against the buyer, it's because there's even a lack of classification of what is the intent of this. Not every quote unquote lead deserves a hand raise or follow up. I would imagine there's probably a really interesting conversation your reps could have out of this conversation, which is more focused on helping someone learn. So at its core, like one very tactical thing that we implemented that I encourage other organizations to think through too is to sort of tag things like this. Is our goal to earn mind share, earn trust, learn, help buyers learn about the problems that we solve? Or is it to show them how we help? Both are okay, but both would necessitate very different follow-up experiences. So I think a lot of times the friction comes down to one side doesn't know what the other is doing, and we're all just trying to convert it into some sort of commercial thing that makes our dashboard green.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, that even in that context of sort of selling that concept of people looking for a trusted advisor, right, in the partners they work with or a salesperson, and carrying on a teaching conversation, that there's this bias towards, well, we've got numbers to hit, we've got to hit our metrics, and so I want to move to a demo. I want to move to something that allows me to advance you in the CRM system to the next stage. Cool, thank you so much. So that does kind of lead us into the metrics part. I know, Bob, you sort of described sort of getting far more sophisticated in terms of asking, a certain level of high-level questions. But what kind of key signals or KPIs is Adobe using now that sort of gets more at that sort of signal-based progression model, I think that you call it, that you guys are on now.
Yeah, it was an interesting journey. For us, the biggest challenge was de-emphasizing the traditional linear model where marketing created top of funnel pipe measured on AQLs, SQLs, and then we measured sales on conversion rates and bookings, right? And so we called the AQL SQL model affectionately the gross tonnage model, right? You're just like piling on as much as you possibly can and not worried so much about what happens at the other end. And so the change I talked about earlier where we shared an outcome, we drove to a shared outcome even during pipeline progression and close, worked itself all the way through to the KPRs, right? We marketing all of a sudden cared about sales conversion rates and actual late stage pipe, and we all cared, sales cared way more about account engagement scores than they had done in the past because we were focused on quality. And so those drove actual results where by aligning these KPIs with the changes we made in roles and responsibilities, we exactly knew what each metric we wanted to focus on and how each side between marketing and sales, what role they could play. And we actually propagated all the way down to compensation, right, which is near and dear to everybody's heart. And I think that end-to-end view of both roles, KPIs, as well as comp is one of the things that drove the success of our model.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Sounds very much sort of aligned there. Ryan, I know you guys have been through a transition as well in terms of your the metrics you look at and sort of how you've sort of gone through an evolution for how that shows up for the teams there. Maybe you could share with us a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I think one thing that you often see is that there are a lot of different KPIs and different teams are managing different KPIs. And it's actually really difficult to see them all in one place to make a really good sense of like what's actually going on. You might have a lens that is top of funnel. You might have one that is like sales conversions. You might have another one that a team is doing that is looking at productive capacity and do you have enough AEs in seat and what does that look like? And then you might have another one that's looking at your ADR transfer rates and opportunity conversion there, and like the way that you measure different segments needs to be different. Like enterprise segment is going to have much of a different type of signals of the health of the pipeline there versus that of a commercial or mid-market segment. So I think one complication that a lot of times happens is that all this data sits in different places. Some of it might be in a relatively centralized place, like in a Databricks or a data lake of some sort. Others might just be in spreadsheets. And so trying to get all this knowledge in one place is really tricky. So one thing that we've been really focusing on is creating data pipelines for all of these key metrics. So we have cross-functional groups between sales, finance, marketing, et cetera. And we're all agreeing on the primary KPIs that we really need to care about for the go-to-market business. And then making sure that we are aligned on those definitions. And then all of that data needs to sit in the data lake. So we all know exactly where it's at and how it's structured. And we build standardized dashboards and views on top of those. But the other main really cool benefit of this is that because they're all in a centralized data lake, we can now make that data available to agents. So now you can have people who are, of course, looking at this data and looking at the insights and things like that, but you can also be much more proactive. AI can also be doing this. It can help do analysis if there's something to troubleshoot or find an anomaly. It can help provide ambient insights where it's proactively telling the key stakeholders of something that it sees. You can make this data available in an MCP layer where now Cloud or other tools can use this information for individuals to do something with and do analysis or create decks from. You can have AI help with propensity modeling and health scoring. Like there's so much more you can do by putting it in a centralized data lake and then structuring an array that works with agents. And so now you have the people being more strategic and you have that compounded effect with AI also being able to use it to deliver insights back to the business.
Yeah, it's a good reminder of how much the sort of siloed version of the world as modeled by the linear buyer journey and the linear sales funnel has created these entire populations of technology stacks and data sets that have been separate. And maybe Jen, I'd love to hear from you, kind of as you work with clients who are facing that problem. How do they sort of where do they start in kind of breaking down those silos, and how do they sort of get aligned around where to go?
Sure. I mean, I remember when I started as a sales rep 22 years ago, I had this impression that every big enterprise, every executive had all of this data and everybody makes data grounded decisions. And then I got into some of them. I was like, hold on, a lot of this seems to be based off gut instinct. And so I think to me, one of the biggest breakdowns comes from we all bring a different set of belief statements and assumption statements about why we think and behave the way that we do. And that's true in our personal lives. It's true in a boardroom. It's true in a corporate office. And I think often one of the biggest misalignment areas comes from different groups, both like horizontally, meaning product, marketing, sales, continued, but also from leader to top down about a very basic question, which is when we lose, why do we lose? And I think a lot of the decisions, a lot of what we choose to track when it comes to data comes down to a belief that we hold about why we lose. So if I am on the sales side and I think that we lose because our price is too high, it's going to cause me to point the finger elsewhere, while maybe not actually acknowledging or understanding the problem itself. So maybe it's not a pricing issue. Maybe it's an issue with the way that we are helping someone evaluate the cost of an action, right? So these things then cause each of these discrete groups to start tracking things that build their backed case of why they're right and the rest of the room is wrong. And I think that was the dangerous thing that I started seeing happen a lot when I would look at these cross-functional go-to-market teams, is we're all trying to make the case that it's not us. And so I think taking a very fundamental question, such as when we lose, why do we lose? One, it's really important that we have a shared belief system around that as a team. And where there's friction, we knock that out. But then two, I think that sort of sets the path of now what do we need to go and look at from a data-driven perspective to understand the root cause of some of that. So to be very specific, there was a client I was working with who said, you know what, we don't like any of marketing's inbound leads because we can convert outbound call-led leads faster. Or we can book more meetings via outbound by just cold calling, which was random. I don't hear that a lot. But so we dug into it, and sure enough, the numbers were bigger on that side. But when you compared marketing's inbound lead conversion versus the cold call originated conversion, it was night and day. It was something like a 40% difference. And so I think if you go in with this inherent belief that this is better and what you're doing is wrong, it doesn't matter what process you set up with, because each group is going to be constantly pulling to why they're right. So that's why I come back to, I think sometimes a lot of this is just getting on the same page, getting out all the dirty laundry before we set up systems of what to track and how we're tracking it and why we're tracking it.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. And I know that you mentioned sort of everybody sort of gathering the data based on, kind of what they were trying to prove or their sort of point of view on the process. I'm curious, and I'll go back to you, Jen, on are people using the buyer journey, which is kind of our next topic, and as the organizing principle around what to look for, and how do they bring in that sort of, I don't know, qualitative component, maybe with leveraging AI to sort of bring more data versus, we all have these classic issues, right? Where, I don't know, you're trying to look at who your competitors are and sales reps don't fill in the fields, right? And so you're the largest set of the data is like NA, but are your clients using call recordings or other ways to sort of get more richness around how the buyer journey informs this?
Well, I wish more companies were doing what Bob and Ryan are and actually truly centering it in the buyer journey. I would say, like, we've been talking about buyer journeys for years. We're still probably not there yet. I hope every year gets us a little closer. I do think you bring up call recordings. I do think call recordings are one of the absolute best advancements to the sales profession, specifically because it allows us to pattern recognize in a way that would have just never been someone's first priority because of how time consuming it is. So I'm a business of one, right? I don't have the complexities that Bob and Ryan do in their business. But even for me, if I do 12 calls in a week, by the end of the week, I'm not pattern recognizing everything else I did prior to the week. Like, I'm not thinking, wow, this same terminology around the way that this prospect described this problem has come up 3 times, because I'm in the weeds, like most sellers are, doing the call, doing the follow-up, following up with the other ones, doing my outbound. And so I think the unique opportunity that something like a call recording technology presents is it's allowing us to pattern recognize these broader themes at a much faster rate than we could have ever done before. Like if I think about doing something like that, that would have been a once a year thing. And by the time the report came out from marketing or sales, it would be probably a little bit expired. And so I think when we talk about the buyer journey, one, there's some things that will always stay the same, but I think even looking at how buyers do research and who buyers involve in a purchase, some of that is definitely changing. And so if we can start to pick up on some of those patterns, what percentage of our deals does the contact talk about bringing in IT at this stage? I think all that does is it makes it easier for us to, one, update our go-to-market strategy on a more regular cadence, but two, give the front line who is responsible for execution much clearer direction around what we need from them in order to execute on that strategy. So I think the whole report concept, right, is like we build these things in a boardroom and then it gets to the front line and it falls apart. I think some of this technology is making it easier to be more specific of what you'd like to see out of your sellers doing differently.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important point about the pace of being able to iterate and get that data and get insights from it. Bob, I know in the report, you kind of used the parable of the blind man and the elephant. I know you guys have gone through a journey around understanding the buyer journey. I would love to hear your perspective.
Sure. And, I think for us, the fundamental end-to-end fact base was what was transformative for us, because everybody has a different anecdote. Everybody has a different narrative. Some of those could be outliers and some of it could be the mainstream most common scenario, but you don't know. They're all probably true, but it's not the complete truth, right? Because there's very few roles in an organization that see the end-to-end buying journey, right? Either through system fragmentation or incomplete data or whatever. And so, as Jen said earlier, it can cause finger pointing, right? Why I'm right and you're wrong. And it's not necessarily because they're lying or wrong on purpose, but because in their context, their lens and fragment of the picture, that's what their conclusion is, but it's not looking at the complete picture. And so what we did was, at the start, we finally got tired of all the different narratives, not being able to figure out, okay, what is actually going on? And so we just bit the bullet and said, we're going to deconstruct 200 deals, end-to-end, 2-year buying cycle, and let's just build the fact space. What do they download? Were they inbound versus outbound? What events did they go to? Who did they talk to? How do we engage with them, right? And we pulled together from individual fragments a complete picture of the buying journey, and that was a great foundation for us because you can't argue with what happened, right? These are facts, things that actually were logged into systems, but pulled together for the first time, and that was our breakthrough. And now we can do that much more easily with the tool sets, with AI. And I totally agree with Jen that it's now more important than ever to keep these views updated because buying behavior is changing. The world is changing. How customers want to engage is changing. But fundamentally, I do believe that the end-to-end view is super important in making sure that you actually are focused on what really needs to happen in the buying journey and how that might need to change.
Yeah, it was heard that story in a bit more depth and be able to see some of that. It's really impressive, and just sort of in some cases like the size of the buying group and the assumptions or the lack of correlation of, I think there was a lack of correlation of what the initial sort of first touch was in terms of what they downloaded, and then the actual solution that they bought, was almost a zero correlation, which kind of leads me over to you, Ryan. I know that you guys have been working on this, and you sell a number of different products. Could you talk about how you segment and move kind of from more, let's say, an account-based approach to more of a buying group approach based on, solution or segment or whatever? How do you handle that?
Yeah. Well, I will say, I agree with Bob and Jen. Like, there's never been a more important time to get all of the signal that you can possibly get, from conversational intelligence to intense signal intelligence. Like, you need to mine as much as possible right now to really understand the state of that account and what that account and the contacts in that account and what they're actually interested in. So I guess a couple of thoughts. One is, if you have not taken the time to really do a buying group analysis, it is essential. Like, take the time to do it, go through the process. It is really important to understand what are the key contacts with these types of accounts, and that can be based off of industry and segment and company size, et cetera, the product mix. Take the time. But the next thing to note is that buying journeys are really complicated, and they can change a lot based off of the segment in the product and whether or not it's first purchase or expansion or which region it's in. There's so many different complexities into it. So one thing that we have started to do is, now that we have all of this signal, like you have the conversational intelligence, you have all of this signal, you can start to create like agents per account, so that are monitoring the state of that account. It's looking for all of the activities and intent signals that this account has been demonstrating, and starts to give recommendations back to the reps or back to marketing. And not only does it give recommendations, it gives personalizations. It'll help you like generate a gong sequence, for example, or a recommended plays and things like that, and to deliver the maximum amount of value to that account, and also recommend the key contacts and what are they engaged in, what are they interested in. So it helps us deliver better value to our prospects and our customers, and to meet them where they're at. I think there's like, buying journeys is one of those things that has a lot of science to it, and also has the next level of that AI unlocks, which is like that state of hyper personalization. Like, okay, we have the science, and now we know the state of the account, and now we can really deliver what is really the best experience and the best kind of messaging for that given customer or that prospect.
Yeah, it really does feel like we're actually getting close to that world of sort of mass personalization in a way that feels more credible, real, and authentic, I think, than we've ever been, certainly. So that does kind of move us into the technology realm, which was the kind of the fourth pillar of what separated the leaders and the laggards. So, Bob, as I know your title has changed. I think when we first met, you were sort of running sales ops and leading partnerships and a bunch of other things, but now you sort of got AI front and center in your title. So how has your job changed?
Yeah, I'm more focused now specifically on the AI transformation, right? And both within Adobe, and as I think about how our go-to-market organization has changed, as well as what we've been doing with our customers. The key thing that I've come to realize is that AI transformation at scale is hard, right? And especially here at Adobe, we have a global sales org of 5,000 sellers. And then, everywhere in the press, you hear about stories of AI not delivering value, and that's fairly commonplace. But I mean, I think the key skill point is when you're able to embed the AI into an existing business process. And that you're not creating something new just for the sake of AI. And that's where I feel like a lot of things fall down, because it's much harder to drive adoption. For us, the bar to get from just a pilot to let's try to drive this thing at scale in the business is exactly that. How easy is it to embed into an existing business process? As an example, if we built an AI tool to identify risk within our deals. And if you can embed that into an existing weekly deal review cadence, then the adoption is fairly easy because the change isn't that hard. If you're creating an entirely new process around how to use AI, for example, to change a customer journey, then it's much harder to do at scale. It's easy to do within a team of 20. It's much harder to do at scale with a team of 2,000. And so the bar for me is much higher in terms of the value and the return you have to get to make it worth the investment in terms of the enablement, the hand-holding, the tech stack changes. And so I think a lot of that, I appreciate the LeanData approach to AI around having a context layer that is agnostic in orchestration, and that's also full cycle, so that you can integrate AI signals and data feeds into an existing orchestration layer where you don't need to introduce necessarily new workflows or integration paths, because that lowers the bar, the activation energy required to take a pilot, which generally works to a certain extent, and be able to scale it and deploy it globally, across an entire sales organization.
Yeah, that is absolutely what we see, which is that that go-to-market process is mission critical for revenue. There's a lot of money being spent on marketing programs, on sellers, on everything else. And so finding an existing process where you can take a particular node, a particular role, a particular sub-process, and leverage AI to make that much more efficient or to drive higher value and higher outcomes out of it, I think is exactly the way to do it, where you sort of are able to isolate it and scale it without causing everybody to have to change their behavior or absorb a giant sort of change management project. So totally agree. Ryan, would love to hear kind of your take on how you're using AI to sort of scale, more broadly across the teams.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'll just share kind of what my constant goal is for the team, and that is to kind of always be on the edge of what is possible. So that means like constantly innovating, constantly like trying new things, learning, being in a constant state of expansive thinking. It also has this new implication, which means you have to not really have any emotional connection to the decisions and things that you made in the past. You have to just be open to being like, hey, tomorrow a new way might be better. The new technology might be possible, and you might just have to disconnect from what you've done in the past and just try the new thing. And so it is. That's kind of like the state I want our team to be in, and that's the goal. But what does that mean in practice? I think we're in this. Like, there's probably never been a more fun time to be a technologist. It's just innovating so quickly. It's almost crazy. It's a little bit on the terrifying side, but it's a lot of fun. So now you have to make a lot more decisions though. Like, what do we want to build? What do we want to buy? How quickly can we like test out a theory? And so it's kind of, I call it thinking agentically. It's a different way of thinking about how to solve a problem. And for example, like anybody can be a builder now. So we can rapidly prototype. If we have an idea for something, great, let's not overly plan it or like meet on it 7 times. Let's just go build a good, spend a day, build it, get it 60-70% of the way there, and let's decide if it has legs or not. It's like, okay, yeah, this could be something. Oh, maybe let's go do 3 or 4. Let's go build 3 or 4 different ways of solving this problem. Let's test it out. In a week, we might have just tested 3 different ways of solving a problem and have a pretty good idea of which one's going to work. And now we can go and take it to production. And so now, how do you know which technologies to use and what you want to build and stuff? This actually becomes really tricky. At the end of the day, like, I want to be working with technology partners that I feel are helping us innovate, helping us push forward. I don't want to be dragging anything along with me, right? So it is like there's things we can build, and like, so that's kind of what I look for with a technology partner, is it's just also being very honest with them. Like, hey, like, this is some of the challenges we're having. This is where we're trying to go. Can you help us get there or not? Or what are you seeing in the market? Like, what ideas do you have? So at the end of the day, like, I think how we are doing this is we have a team of AI engineers that are rapidly building and prototyping, but we've also trained, we've been training, I should say, like pretty much all of marketing in a broader organization of how to build agents, how to work with agents, how to like start thinking agentically, so that way it becomes ubiquitous in the organization over time. So yes, you have a team of expert builders. That is like a primary focus of what they do, but everyone has also been trained to a degree of how to do it, and that way they can unlock themselves. And like I said earlier about decentralization, I think that's really important. And that is also how you reach the stage of a compounding effect. So that is kind of how we're doing it. Is like we are rapidly prototyping. We're training everyone how to be builders. It does introduce a new need. This is a brand new need, I think, is an AI ops and agentic operations team who is going to be responsible for managing all of these agents and monitoring their health and observability, evaluation, validation, all of that. So we are starting to build that type of team. But the shift that we are seeing is that everyone can be builders. We can get to rapid prototypes really quickly. We can find this really healthy mix between new technologies that we're evaluating and partnering with, and ones that we are building to really deliver the best experience for our internal team members and also for our buyers.
Yeah, absolutely. It is sort of changing, I think, not just how we think about our business and how we act, but how we get organized around kind of this new world, right? Where you've got builders, which raises the importance of people like architects and sort of people who are covering design, brand, all the other things that when you make everybody a builder, there are risks that they kind of can go off the rails there. So the guardrails, visibility, all that becomes very important. All right, we're down to just a few more minutes left here. So I think, Jen, I'll hand it to you. So you have any other comments on that? And then after that, maybe just sort of like what's your advice for people who are sort of looking at this data, who want to improve? What's your recommendation for a good first step to get more effective in their go-to-market execution?
Sure. I won't add a thing to what Bob and Ryan shared because those are beautiful answers that I'm not going to top. I will say, if you are going to take a single next step, it's kind of a curve from where we were at. I would say before we build anything is go out, seek to understand the customer's perspective through some sort of third-party win-loss analysis. I just did a study looking at enterprise and mid-market buyers, and one of the things that came out of it was that 65% of mid-market and enterprise buyers said, we are not honest with our vendors around why we churn and why we don't buy. And so call recordings and all of this data that we're sitting on is fabulous for one side of the equation. But I think we also have to think about what is the ultimate source of truth. If we really want to be buyer centric, if we really want to build a go-to-market strategy around our buyer, we also have to make sure we're getting to the truth of that buyer. So I would say pair all of that data that was now much easier to get our hands on with some sort of external data that helps us really truly understand what's behind churn, lost deals, things like that.
Yeah, thank you. Bob, how about you? What's a good next step for people?
I think to echo what Ryan said, I think a lot of it is get started, right? Understand what the technology can do. Just as importantly, understand what it can't do, because we're in turbulent times, and limitations go away after a few months, right? But if you don't lose sight of the North Star of where you're trying to get to, and any incremental step towards there it adds business value, then a lot of it is that experimentation and getting started.
Yeah, absolutely. Ryan, how about you?
Yeah, agreed. I think one thing I guess I'll add to that is that I think sometimes you start to try to use AI for doing certain little pieces of things, or you start to almost think too big. I could build an agent who can do all of this, but they're missing a middle ground here, which is like Claude calls it co-work. But I really like this idea of it. It's like no, like any project you go start to do, just start to work on it with AI, and you can brainstorm together. You can come up with solutions together. You can build a deck together. You can like write a draft together. You can like build a product or an app that helps create a better way of telling a data story. Like there's so many things you can do, and you just get in the habit of working on it together. And it's also a really easy place to start because you don't have to worry about learning too much yet. You don't have to, try to implement a really complex problem and all the potential integrations you have to have and like all the other teams you might have to work with. It's just something you can just do and work on it with, and just like. So I guess that's what I'd probably say. And as the thing I'd add on top of that is then start thinking about like, what does my day look like? What are our teams doing all the time? Where could we start to plug in agents or things to unlock to allow our people to be driving growth and strategy, and letting them be compounded using AI to drive agility and efficiency, because that's where I think the line is. You need people to drive growth and strategy, and we need AI to help unlock agility and efficiency. So I think you can mature to that, but I think one amazing use case is just immediately start co-working with it and just bring it into the way that you function.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I tie those together. I think I really get a sense for people need to begin building these skills. We don't know exactly where it's all going to come out, but they need to be adept and understanding how to do it and working with it. So I want to thank all of you so much. I want to let everyone know on the webinar here that you can get access to the full report. We're happy to send you that. You can look at all the data in more detail. But I mainly want to thank our panel today. Those are just some fantastic examples. And thank you so much for spending the time with us. Thank all of you for tuning in. We really appreciate it. We're happy to help you on this journey at LeanData. This is what we do. We focus on go-to-market execution. And so I'm happy to continue the conversation with you on that front as well. Thank you all very much.